I still remember that day like it just happened, the smell of antiseptic in the air, the sound of nurses walking quickly down the hall, the way the fluorescent lights hummed above me. I was sitting in the small examination room staring at my hands. They were trembling and cold. My name is Lisa, and I never thought a regular visit to the doctor would change my life forever. I had gone for a checkup because I had been feeling dizzy and weak for weeks. My husband, Mark, told me I was just tired, that I worked too hard. He said maybe I was making a big deal out of nothing, and I believed him because that's what I always did. I believed him. The nurse smiled politely as she took my blood pressure, but I noticed her hands shaking slightly. She kept glancing at the door like she was waiting for someone. When the doctor walked in, I felt something shift in the room. His eyes were kind but heavy, like he was carrying the weight of something he couldn't say. He asked a few questions about my health. Then he leaned CL. Over and said quietly, Lisa, I'll be right back. Please stay here. I sat still watching the clock tick on the wall. I tried to ignore the cold feeling crawling up my spine. The doctor came back holding a small folded paper. He looked straight into my eyes and slipped it into my hand. He said softly, I want you to go straight to the pharmacy after this. Don't go home yet. Please trust me. When I opened the paper, my heart nearly stopped. Written in rushed handwriting were the words, don't go home, run. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I looked at him, confused, my voice shaking. I whispered, Doctor, what does this mean? He just said quietly, I can't explain right now, but please go somewhere safe and call the police. Then he stood and walked out like nothing had happened. I sat frozen, trying to make sense of it. All my mind ran wild. Was Mark in trouble? Was someone waiting for me? Was it a mistake? But deep down, something in my chest told me the doctor was right, that I was in danger. I walked out of the clinic, my heart pounding. My hands gripped the paper so tight it almost tore. I stood by my car, staring at the road, unable to decide where to go. My phone buzzed. It was Mark calling. The sound of his name on the screen made my stomach twist. I didn't answer. I got in the car and started driving without knowing where I was headed. The only thing I knew was that I couldn't go home. I ended up at an old diner near the highway, a place I used to visit with my mom years ago. I sat in the corner shaking, trying to catch my breath. The waitress came over and asked if I was all right. I nodded, but I wasn't. My whole body felt like it was trembling from the inside out. After a few minutes, I pulled out my phone and called the police. I told them about the note about the doctor and that I was scared. They asked me to stay where I was and that an officer would meet me soon. When the officer arrived, he introduced himself as Officer Harris. He was calm, kind, his voice low and steady. He asked me a few questions about my husband and my home. I told him Mark worked in construction, that he was often away for long hours. But recently he had been coming home late, smelling like gasoline and something sharp like metal. I never thought much of it until that moment. The officer nodded, then said quietly, Lisa, the doctor called us too. He said he found something on your test results that didn't make sense, and when he tried to check your medical file, it had been tampered with. He said someone had been accessing your information without permission. My mouth went dry. I whispered, but why? Who would do that? He looked at me carefully and said, we think your husband might be involved in something dangerous, something that puts you at risk. That's why we need you to stay somewhere safe tonight. I felt my knees weaken. I had always trusted Mark, believed every word he said. Even when he was cold or distant, I thought maybe I wasn't a good enough wife, that maybe his temper was my fault, but now I wasn't so sure. The officer took me to a safe home, used just outside the city. It was a small apartment used for victims of domestic violence, though I couldn't bring myself to believe that's what I was. I sat on the bed, staring at the walls, thinking about every argument, every bruise. Every night I had cried quietly so he wouldn't hear, and suddenly it all made sense. The fear, the silence, the control. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Mark's voice in my head, calling my name the way he used to when he was angry. I held the note in my hand, reading it again and again. Don't go home, run. It wasn't just a warning, it was a lifeline. And in that moment I decided that no matter what came next, I wouldn't go back. I would find out the truth. I would protect myself no matter how scared I was. I didn't know then that the note was only the beginning. That night would open doors I never knew existed and reveal a truth darker than anything I could have imagined. The safe house was small and quiet. The air smelled faintly of lavender and cleaning spray. The room was a single lamp beside the bed and a thin blanket folded neatly on the chair. I sat there for a long time, unable to move. My mind was full of questions, but my heart already knew that my life had changed forever. The next morning I woke up early. The sun was barely rising, its light falling across the window like a promise. I hadn't eaten in almost a day, but I didn't feel hungry. I made some instant coffee from the little kitchen and sat at the table staring at the steam. I kept thinking about the doctor and how his eyes looked when he handed me that note, like he was scared for me, like he knew something terrible was coming. Around 8, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Officer Harris was standing there again. He looked tired but kind. He asked if I had slept. I shook my head and he sighed quietly. He said, "Lisa, we need to talk." I nodded and sat down as he pulled out a folder from his bag. He said the police had gone to my house late last night. There was no sign of Mark the neighbor. RS said they heard loud noises earlier in the evening, then nothing. After that the lights went out and his truck was gone. My heart dropped. I asked what they found inside. He hesitated, then said, "We found something unusual in the basement, Lisa. There were several containers of chemicals and metal pipes, and we believe he was building something dangerous, something that could hurt people." I covered my mouth, trying not to scream. The room started spinning. He said softly, "We also found some papers with your name on them, including what looks like your medical records. It seems he had access to your information somehow, and he was trying to change or remove data from the system. The doctor noticed the changes, and that's why he contacted us." I couldn't understand any of it. My husband had always been a quiet man, strict, sometimes distant, but never cruel or violent, not in ways I could prove anyway, but this was something else entirely. I asked the officer what I should do. He said, "For now, stay here. We'll keep someone nearby until we know more." He gave me a small phone with an emergency number on it and told me not to contact Mark no matter what happens. When he left, I sat alone again. The silence of the room felt heavier now. I picked up my bag and took out a photo of Mark and me on our wedding day. We looked happy, young, full of dreams. I stared at that picture until tears blurred my eyes. How could someone I loved so deeply become a stranger? As night fell, I lay awake listening to every creak in the walls. Every car passing by made me jump. My phone buzzed once around midnight, and when I looked, the screen said, "Unknown number." I froze. The phone kept buzzing again and again until it stopped. A few seconds later, a message appeared. It said, "You shouldn't have gone to the doctor." My whole body went cold. I sat up trembling. I knew it had to be him. I called the emergency number right away. The voice on the other end said, "Stay calm. We'll send someone immediately. Just lock the door and stay away from the windows." I did exactly that. I sat in the corner holding the phone, closed, tears streaming down my face. I whispered to myself over and over, "It's going to be okay, it's going to be okay," but deep down I wasn't sure. Minutes felt like hours. Then there was another sound outside, a soft tap at the window. I turned slowly, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I pulled the curtain just enough to see a shadow moving near the trees. I couldn't make out the face, but I knew that shape. I had seen it too many times before. It was Mark. Before I could even breathe, there was a loud knock at the door, followed by a voice, "Police, open up." I hesitated, then ran to unlock it. 2 officers rushed in their flashlights, cutting through the dark. They checked every corner, but by the time they went outside, Mark was gone. One of them said, "He must have known where you were. That means he's been watching you for a while." I felt my knees weaken, and one of the officers helped me sit down. They said, "We'll move you to another safe location tonight, someplace more secure." I nodded silently, feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. They took me to a motel an hour away. The officer stayed in the car outside all night while I tried to rest, but I couldn't. My mind kept going back to that message, to his shadow in the dark. I wondered what he was planning, what he wanted from me. Why me? The next morning, Officer Harris called. He said they found Mark's truck abandoned near a gas station. The security camera showed him buying something, but they couldn't see what he looked calm. Too calm, like a man who knew exactly what he was doing. I sat on the motel bed staring at my reflection in the mirror. I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. She looked scared, broken, but there was something else in her eyes too, a spark of strength, something new, something that said, I will not let him win. For years I had lived quietly, afraid to speak, afraid to question, but now fear wasn't enough to keep me silent. I decided I would. Help the police find him. I would tell them everything I knew, even the things I had tried to forget. That day, I picked up the phone and called Officer Harris again. I said, I want to tell you everything about my husband, about what he's been doing, about what I've seen over the years. He said, take your time, Lisa, we're listening. And as I began to speak for the first time in years, I felt something break free inside me, not fear, not pain, but truth. I sat across from Officer Harris at the small police station. The next morning, the walls were pale gray and the smell of coffee filled the air. He had a notebook open in front of him, and his voice was calm but serious. He said, Lisa, I need you to start from the beginning. Tell me about your husband. Tell me about the things that never felt right. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. I took a deep breath and said, when I met Mark, he was charming. He was quiet and polite, the kind of man who opened doors and brought flowers. I was 26 back then, work. As a nurse at the local clinic, he came in one day with a cut on his arm from a construction site accident. He made me laugh, and after a few weeks he asked me out. I said yes. At first he made me feel safe. He never raised his voice, never got angry. He wanted to take care of everything. The bills, the house, the car. I thought I was lucky, but slowly little things started to change. He began checking my phone, asking where I was every minute. If I stayed late at work, he would show up at the clinic, pretending he was just there to pick me up. But I could see it in his eyes. He was checking on me. A few years later, he started keeping things in the basement. He told me it was just tools and spare parts for his job, but he always locked the door. I asked once why, and he said, because I don't want you to hurt yourself with anything down there. That sounded strange, but I didn't want to start a fight, so I stayed quiet. One night I woke up and he wasn't in bed. I went downstairs and found the basement door open. I could hear him whispering to someone on the phone. He sounded angry. I only heard a few words. Something about a delivery and about someone who knew too much. When he saw me, he slammed the door shut and said, "Go back to bed, Lisa. It's late." I tried to ask him who he was talking to, but he looked at me with a face I didn't recognize, cold and dark, and I just walked away. As I told Officer Harris all of this, he kept nodding slowly, writing things down. When I finished, he said, "Lisa, I think your husband may be involved in something criminal." He paused and said, "We think he was using your clinic records to access information about certain patients and medications. There's a pattern here, and it connects to a few recent cases." I stared at him, my stomach turning. What kind of cases, I asked. He looked at me carefully and said, "A few thefts involving prescription drugs and some forged medical reports. One of them had your signature on it, but it was fake. I felt my breath catch," he said quietly. "That's why the do. Store tried to warn you. He noticed something wrong with your file." The truth hit me like a wave. All those late nights, the secrecy, the locked basement. He wasn't just hiding from me. He was using me. I felt sick. My whole marriage had been built on lies. I asked what I could do to help. Officer Harris said, "We need you to stay safe and stay quiet. Don't answer any unknown calls. If he tries to reach you, let us know right away." He handed me a small folder with a few printed photos inside. They were blurry surveillance images. He said, "These were found in your basement." I opened the folder and froze. There were pictures of me walking to work at the grocery store. Even through my bedroom window, I felt my throat close. I couldn't speak. He said gently, "Lisa, you're brave for coming forward. You're not alone in this. We'll protect you, but we need to move fast, because if he knows we're on to him, he'll disappear." That night, I was moved again to another safe house farther away. This one was in a small town surround by woods. The house belonged to a retired couple who volunteered to help the police. They were kind people. The woman's name was Betty, and she made me warm soup and told me to rest. I sat by the fireplace feeling both grateful and scared. When I went to bed, I kept thinking about the photos, about the years I spent pretending everything was fine. I thought about how many times I had smiled at him while he watched me like a stranger. I cried quietly that night, but somewhere deep inside I made a promise I wouldn't let fear control me anymore. The next morning, Betty came into my room with a letter in her hand. She said, "A young man dropped this off. He said it was urgent." He left before I could ask his name. My heart began to race. I took the envelope carefully and saw my name written in that familiar handwriting. It was Mark's. Inside there was only one line written in black ink. "You should have trusted me, Lisa. Now it's too late." The paper slipped from my hands. I stood there frozen. The room felt small, my breath heavier. Betty looked worried. She said, "Do you want me to call the police?" I nodded silently, tears welling in my eyes. Within minutes, Officer Harris was on the phone. He said, "We're coming right away. Don't touch anything. We need to check if that note carries any trace evidence." When they arrived, they scanned the area but found nothing. The roads around the house were empty. Harris looked at me and said, "He knows where you are again, Lisa. We have to move you to a secure facility. Now." I looked at Betty, who held my hand tightly, and whispered, "It will be okay, dear. You're stronger than you think." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But as we drove away that night, I looked out the window and swore I saw a car following us far back in the dark. Its headlights dim and steady. The drive to the new safe facility felt endless. The road stretched out under a cloudy sky, and rain tapped softly against the car windows. Officer Harris sat beside me, silent. Most of the time his eyes stayed on the road below. I could tell he was thinking. I wanted to ask if we were safe, but the words just wouldn't come. We arrived at a quiet property surrounded by tall pine trees. It looked more like a small retreat than a police safe house. There were 2 other officers already there waiting. They showed me inside and explained that this would be my new place until they found Mark. The house was simple but clean. There was a small living room, a kitchen, and a bedroom at the back. Everything looked peaceful, but to me it felt like another cage. Officer Harris gave me a calm look and said, "Lisa, I know this is hard, but you need to trust us. We're close to finding out what Mark was really doing." He told me they were tracing the chemicals found in the basement and believed Mark had been working with a group involved in illegal medical experiments. My stomach turned when I heard that. I asked what kind of experiments. He said quietly, "The kind that hurt people." I sat down, my hands trembling. I had no idea who my husband really was. The man who used to kiss my forehead goodnight had been living a double life right beside me. I tried to remember moments when something felt wrong, moments when my heart whispered danger, but I had ignored it all because love had blinded me. The next few days were long and quiet. I was told not to use my phone or internet. The officers brought me meals and checked in often. Sometimes at night I could hear the wind outside moving through the trees. It made the whole house creak softly like it was breathing. One evening I was sitting near the window looking out at the forest when I saw something small and shiny near the fence. I stepped closer. It looked like a piece of metal reflecting the porch light. I told the guard and he went out to check. When he came back, his face looked serious. He said, "It's a camera hidden under a rock." My knees went weak. Someone had been watching me even here. The officer took it away and said, "We'll send this to forensics." He told me not to worry, but I could see the tension in his face. He called Harris right away, and I heard him say into the phone, "Sir, he's tracking her again somehow." When Harris arrived the next morning, I asked him how Mark kept finding me. He said, "We think he may have planted something on you before you left the house the first night, or maybe even inside your things. We'll have to scan everything you have." I handed them my bag, my clothes, my shoes. They searched carefully, and after a while, one of the officers pulled out a tiny device from the seam of my purse. It was smaller than a coin. I felt sick. Harris looked at me gently and said, "It's okay, Lisa, we've got it now." But I could tell from his tone that this changed everything. He said, "He's smarter than we thought." For the next few hours, they kept me inside while a team swept the property for more trackers. They found 2 more, one under the back step and another inside a flower pot. The realization hit me that every safe place was just temporary. Every wall had cracks. My hands shook as I made tea, trying to keep myself from falling apart. Harris saw it and said, "You're doing great. You've survived every turn so far. Just hold on a bit longer." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the soft hum of the generator outside and the distant sound of rain. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who smiled at dinner parties and believed her husband was just tired from work. I thought about how fragile that version of me was, how naive. But then I thought about now, about how I was still here, breathing, surviving. The next morning, Harris told me they had traced one of Mark's credit cards. He had used it in a small town 2 hours away. They sent a team immediately. A few hours later, he called back and said they found the truck, but not him. There was a note inside, addressed to me. It said, "You can't hide from the truth, Lisa. You were part of it too." I froze when I heard that Harris said, "It's just intimidation. He wants to scare you," but I couldn't help thinking, what if there was some? I didn't know something he meant literally. That evening, as the sky turned orange, I sat by the window again, staring at the horizon. I whispered to myself, "I'm not afraid anymore," but my voice shook. The truth was I was terrified, but I also knew I couldn't give up. I had to know why this was happening and what he was really doing. A few hours later, Harris received a call. He looked at me and said, "Lisa, I think we finally have something solid. There's a woman who used to work with your husband. She's agreed to talk to us. She says she has proof of what he was involved in and why he might be after you." I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. Harris said, "We'll go meet her tomorrow. She's in a nearby town and we'll keep everything quiet." I nodded slowly, knowing this could be the moment everything changed. That night before sleeping, I said a small prayer. I asked God to give me strength, not to run from the truth, but to face it, whatever it was, because maybe that was the only way to truly be free. Morning air was cool and heavy with mist. When we left the safe house, Officer Harris drove the car, and I sat quietly in the back seat, staring out at the forest. The trees moved slowly past us like shadows. I had barely slept, my mind replaying the same thought over and over. Who was that woman, and what did she know about Mark? We reached a small diner on the edge of town just after sunrise. The place looked old but cozy, with red booths and the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the door. Harris told me to stay in the car while he went in first to make sure everything was safe. After a few minutes, he came back and nodded. "It's okay, Lisa. She's inside." I followed him through the door. My hands felt cold, even though the diner was warm. Sitting at a corner table was a woman in her late 50s, her hair gray and tied back neatly. She looked tired, but her eyes were sharp and alert. She stood when she saw me and said quietly, "You must be Lisa. I'm Clara." We sat down together. Harris stayed nearby, but a space. Clara wrapped her hands around her coffee cup and looked down for a moment. Before speaking, she said, "I used to work with your husband. I was a lab technician at the same research company about 5 years ago." I felt my heart pound. She continued, "Back then, Mark wasn't working construction. Like, you thought he was helping manage a small lab that was doing private drug testing. They said it was legal, but after a while things stopped feeling right. We were asked to destroy files, hide samples, and mark false results. When I refused, they fired me, and a few months later the lab disappeared like it never existed." I whispered, "What does this have to do with me?" Clara sighed deeply. "Lisa, your medical information was used as part of a fake trial. They used your name to cover up an unapproved experiment. When that doctor found the changes in your file, he realized your husband's team was using patient data to hide illegal research. If the authorities had found that file, Mark and everyone involved I'd have gone to prison." I felt sick, my body trembling. I said, I didn't know anything." She nodded softly. "I believe you, but now that the truth is out, they think you might have something that could expose them. Maybe a document, a drive, something that proves what they did." Harris leaned forward and said, "That's why they've been watching her, right?" Clara said, "Yes, they think she's a loose end." The diner suddenly felt smaller. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Clara looked at me kindly and said, "Lisa, your husband may have started this, but now there are others involved, people with money and power. He's hiding from them too. That's why he warned you not to go home. That's why he said, trust no one. I felt a strange ache in my chest. The man who had frightened me so deeply might have also been trying to protect me in his own twisted way. Harris looked thoughtful. He said, if that's true, we're dealing with something much bigger than we thought. Clara pulled something from her purse and slid it across the table. It was a small flash drive. She said, this contains copies of some old reports I kept. Just in case I didn't trust anyone back then, I think they'll help you understand what he was really part of. I reached out my hand slowly, my fingers brushing against the drive. It felt like holding a piece of truth and danger. At the same time, Harris took it gently and said, we'll get this to our tech team. Clara nodded and said, be careful, he's not the only one looking for it. When we left the diner, the air outside felt colder. I walked to the car in silence. Harris started the engine, but before he could pull out, I noticed a dark sedan parked across the street with tinted windows. It hadn't been there before. The driver was watching us. I whispered Harris and he looked up immediately. He started the car and said, hold on. He took a sharp turn out of the parking lot and the sedan followed. My pulse quickened. I gripped the seat as we sped down the quiet road. Rain began to fall again, tapping against the windshield. Harris radioed the other team. We're being followed. Repeat, we're being followed. The car behind us sped up, lights flashing for a second, then turning off. Harris took another turn through a narrow road leading into the woods. I looked back and saw the sedan still there, close now, too close. The road was slick and winding. Harris said, Lisa, stay down. He swerved around a bend, the tires sliding slightly before gripping again. After what felt like forever, we saw flashing police lights ahead. 2 patrol cars blocked the road. The sedan slowed, then turned sharply and disappeared into the trees. The officers jumped out and checked the area, but it was gone. Harris got out breathing heavily and said, that's confirmation someone doesn't want her alive. They escorted us back to the safe facility under heavier protection. I sat on the couch that night, staring at the rain streaking down the windows. I held a warm blanket around my shoulders, but I couldn't stop shaking. I whispered into the quiet room, why did he get me into this? What was he thinking? A few hours later, my phone buzzed again. It was another message from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. This time it said, I told you not to trust them. You're in danger there too. Meet me tomorrow by the old church. You'll know the truth. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the words, my hands trembling. Who was telling the truth now? The husband I once loved, or the officers protecting me? I didn't know anymore. All I knew was that something inside me whispered that I had to go. I had to find out. Once and for all. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I kept staring at the message on my phone over and over again. My heart was torn between fear and curiosity. The words felt real, too personal, too specific to ignore. I thought about how Officer Harris had helped me, how he had protected me, but something about that message made me doubt everything I had been told. Maybe there was a truth none of them wanted me to see. The rain had stopped by M. Morning, the world outside looked gray and quiet. The air was still damp, and the road shimmered with thin puddles. I packed a small bag with only what I needed: my wallet, a bottle of water, and the tiny cross necklace my mother gave me before she passed away. I held it tightly and whispered, "Please protect me, Mom." I waited until the officer assigned to guard me stepped outside to make a call. Then I slipped out the back door and walked quickly down the road. My heart was pounding, but I kept telling myself this was something I had to do. I needed answers. I needed to look Mark in the eyes and ask why. The old church was about 6 miles away. I remembered it well. From years ago, it was where Mark and I had gone for Christmas Eve service once, back when we still pretended we were happy. The walk felt endless, my shoes soaked through. By the time I reached the gravel path that led to the churchyard, the building looked abandoned, its wooden doors slightly open, like it had been waiting for me. I pushed the door gently, and stepped inside. Dust floated through the light that came from the broken windows. The air smelled like old books and rain. My heart thudded louder with every step I took. Then I saw him standing near the altar. Mark looked thinner than I remembered. His beard had grown, and there were dark circles under his eyes, but his gaze was still the same, cold and piercing. He didn't move when he saw me. He just said quietly, "You shouldn't have come, Lisa." I swallowed hard and said, "You asked me to. I need to know the truth, Mark. What did you do to me? What did you drag me into?" His jaw tightened. He said, "They lied to you, Lisa. Everything you've been told about me is only half true." I took a step closer. My voice shook. "Tell me then, tell me everything." He ran a hand through his hair and said, "I never wanted you to be part of it. The company I worked for was experimenting on patients without their knowledge. They used your identity because your file was clean. No family, no complications, no record of illness. You were perfect for what they needed. I was forced to help them change the data, or they would have killed us both." My knees felt weak. I leaned against the pew, trying to stay upright. He continued, "When I found out they were planning to use your blood for another test, I tried to stop them. That's when they came after me. And when I told the doctor to warn you, he helped me fake the note that said 'run,' because I knew they would come for you next." I shook my head, trying to process his words. It all sounded impossible and yet too real to deny. I asked, "Then why are you still running?" He said, "Because I have proof I stole their files. I have everything, and they know it. They've been following me, and now they're using the police to find me through you." My eyes filled with tears. I said Harris would never do that. He's been protecting me. Mark looked at me sadly and said, "You really think anyone in their system can be trusted? They want to silence both of us." Before I could answer, a noise echoed from outside. Footsteps and the crunch of gravel. Mark's expression changed instantly. He whispered, "They found us. Get down." He grabbed my arm and pulled me behind one of the pews. My breath came out in gasps. My hands shook uncontrollably. The heavy wooden doors creaked open. Voices called out, "Police, we know you're in here. Mark Davis, put your hands where we can see them." Harris's voice rang out sharp and clear. My mind spun. I didn't know what to do. Was Harris here to save me or take me? Mark whispered, "Don't move." He slowly stood up. Hands raised. Harris and two other officers entered, guns drawn. Harris shouted, "Drop whatever you have, Mark." Mark said, "You're making a mistake. You don't know what's really happening." Harris said, "You think I don't? I know exactly what you did and who you sold those files to." Mark's face went pale. He said, "I didn't sell anything. I was trying to expose them the truths on this drive." He pulled a small flash drive from his jacket. Harris tensed. Mark placed it on the altar and stepped back. Then everything happened too fast. One of the other officers shouted, "He's reaching for something." A loud sound echoed, and I screamed. Mark fell to the ground, his body limp, blood spreading across the dusty floor. I froze. The sound of the gunshot kept ringing in my ears. Harris ran forward, shouting, "Call an ambulance." Now he knelt beside Mark and pressed down on the wound. I crawled to the altar, shaking. Harris looked at me and said, "Stay back, Lisa, stay back." I stared at Mark, his lips moving faintly. He whispered something I could barely hear. I leaned closer and caught his last words, "Don't let them destroy it. The truth is in the second drive." Then his eyes closed and everything went silent. I sat there numb, watching the life fade from the man I had loved, feared and pitied all at once. Harris looked at me with genuine sorrow in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Lisa, but he left us no choice." I didn't answer. I just stared at the blood on the wooden floor and thought about everything that had been lost. Later that night, I sat in a hospital room, wrapped in a blanket. The police said it was over, that I was safe, but inside I knew it wasn't. I could still hear Mark's last words echoing in my mind, "The truth is in the second drive." I didn't know what it meant, but something told me this story wasn't finished yet. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the faint rain outside the window. I sat on the bed with my hands folded in my lap, staring at the floor. My body felt heavy, but my mind wouldn't stop moving. The words kept echoing over and over in my head. "The truth is in the second drive." I could still see Mark's face, pale and weak, his hand trembling. When he said those last words, he had looked scared. But there had been something else in his eyes too, a kind of peace, maybe even love. I didn't know what to believe anymore. Everything I thought was true had shattered, and all I had left was that one sentence. Officer Harris came in a little later, carrying a small notebook. He looked tired, his voice softer than before. He said, "Lisa, how are you holding up?" I didn't answer right away. I just asked quietly, "Where is the flash drive, the one he gave you at the church?" He paused, then said, "It's in evidence now, being analyzed by our tech team." I nodded, but deep down something felt wrong. I didn't know why, but I felt like there was more to it. He asked if I needed anything: water, food, rest. I said, "No, thank you." He smiled sadly and said, "You've been through enough. We'll make sure you were protected now." He left the room, and for a few minutes I just sat there listening to the rain tapping softly against the window pane. Later that evening, a nurse came in to change my bandage. She was kind and gentle, her eyes full of concern. She said, "You're lucky to be alive, ma'am." I nodded and thanked her. She hesitated before leaving and then said quietly, "There was a man here earlier asking for you. He said he was your brother." I frowned. I don't have a brother. She looked uncertain and said he left when the officers came in. Eh? Soon as she walked out, my heart started racing. I got up slowly and went to the window through the raindrops. I saw a figure across the street standing under a lamppost. His hood was up, but I could feel his gaze fixed on me when the light flickered. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Mark, about the second drive, and about the man outside. I waited until the halls went quiet. Then I slipped out of my room and walked to the nurse's station. No one was there. I moved down the corridor until I reached the small office where Harris had left his things. The door was slightly open and his laptop was on the desk. The screen glowed faintly with a file name I could barely make out. It said, "Evidence Drive 1 Confidential." I stepped closer. My heart pounded. I knew it was wrong, but something inside me pushed forward. I needed to know. I clicked the file. A list of documents opened, each labeled with a date and a name. There were photos, reports, signatures. My name appeared over and over again. Lisa Davis, subject 12. Lisa Davis, secondary trial. Lisa Davis, XPA. The words blurred before my eyes. I covered my mouth, trying not to cry. He had told the truth. The company had used me, my name, my identity, in secret medical trials that never existed on record. And the files didn't just include me. There were dozens of other names. Before I could look further, I heard footsteps. I closed the laptop quickly and backed away. Harris walked in a second later, his expression unreadable. He said, "Lisa, what are you doing here?" I stammered. "I couldn't sleep. I just needed air." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly and said, "All right, let's get you back to your room." But as we walked down the hallway, I felt it again, that heavy feeling that something wasn't right. When we reached my door, he said, "Softly, try to rest. You're safe." Now he smiled, but his eyes didn't smile with him. When he left, I sat on the bed and whispered to myself, "The truth is in the second D drive." I pulled my bag closer and searched through it, hoping maybe somehow Mark had hidden something there. That one word, okay. When I got there, the sky was bright and clear. The first sunny day in weeks. Clara was already waiting. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "Lisa, you shouldn't be out yet," I said quietly. I had to come. He left this for me. I showed her the drive. Her expression changed instantly. She said that might be what they were all looking for. We plugged it into her small laptop and waited. The screen blinked once, then opened a folder with one word written across it, "Proof." Inside were dozens of files, photos, documents, emails, and one video labeled "Final Evidence." We played it. The image was blurry at first, then focused on a man speaking directly into the camera. It was Mark. He looked tired, older, desperate. He said, "If you're watching this, it means they got to me. This drive contains everything. The drug trials, the fake reports, the patient names, including the people they hurt. They were using human DNA to create new compounds for private military research. It wasn't about medicine, it was about control." He paused, breathing hard, and said, "They'll try to blame me, but Lisa, please don't believe them. Protect yourself. Trust no one, not even the ones who claim they're helping you." The screen went dark. I sat, frozen, tears filling my eyes. Clara whispered, "Oh my God, this is huge, Lisa. This could expose everything." I looked at her and said, "What do we do now?" She said, "We go public. We take this to someone outside the system, someone who can't be bought, someone like the press." But before we could move, the door of the diner opened. Harris stepped inside. His expression was calm, but his eyes were cold. He looked straight at me and said, "Lisa, we need to talk." When I saw Harris standing there, my heart dropped. He didn't look like the kind officer who had helped me at the hospital. He looked different, colder, almost rehearsed. Clara froze beside me, gripping my hand under the table. I could feel her trembling. I tried to keep my face calm, but my heartbeat was loud in my ears. Harris walked slowly toward us, his boots echoing. On the floor, he said, in a low, even tone, "Lisa, you left the hospital without permission. You shouldn't be here." I swallowed hard and said softly, "I just needed air. I needed to think." He nodded slightly, but his eyes didn't move from the small laptop sitting open on the table. The drive was still plugged in, and the video paused right on Mark's face. For a second, none of us spoke. The air felt heavy, thick, like the whole diner was holding its breath. Then Harris said quietly, "Why don't you give me that drive? I'll take it somewhere safe." Clara shook her head slowly and said, "You don't look like you want to keep it safe, officer." He stared at her, then at me, and his expression changed. He sighed and said, "You really think you can fight them, Lisa? You have no idea what you're dealing with. This goes deeper than you know." His words made my stomach twist. I said, "Then tell me what I'm dealing with. Tell me what's going on." He leaned in close enough that I could see the tired lines under his eyes. He whispered, "They were using your husband's research for something else he found out and tried to stop them. That's why he died. That note you got wasn't from him. It was from someone who knew what was coming. They wanted you out of the house because it wasn't safe anymore." Clara whispered, "Then why are you here? What do you want?" He looked at us and said, "Because they told me to find you before you find anyone else." That's when Clara grabbed the laptop, slammed it shut, and pulled my arm around. "Lisa," she shouted. We pushed past the chairs and sprinted out of the diner. The sky had turned dark again, gray clouds swallowing the sunlight. We ran through the parking lot, my shoes slipping on the wet pavement. Harry shouted behind us, "Stop, don't make this worse." I didn't look back. We jumped into Clara's old pickup, and she started the engine with shaking hands. The tires screeched as we pulled onto the road. My chest burned from fear and cold air. I clutched the flash drive in my hand like it was my heartbeat. Clara drove fast, all the side streets weaving between cars and alleys. Finally, she pulled over behind an abandoned warehouse, breathing hard. We sat there for a long moment, trying to catch our breath. Then she turned to me and said, "We can't go home. We can't go back anywhere. They'll track us. We have to think." I nodded, wiping tears from my cheeks. My mind was spinning. I said quietly, "He said it wasn't from Mark, that the note was a warning." Clara frowned. "Maybe part of it is true, maybe part isn't. We can't trust anyone right now, not even him." We decided to stay there until it got dark. Clara found an old blanket in the back seat and wrapped it around my shoulders. We didn't talk much. The silence said everything. After a while, I asked her, "Clara, why are you helping me?" She smiled faintly and said, "Because once I was in a mess like this too. Someone helped me when I didn't deserve it. I guess this is my turn." I looked at her, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a little less alone. That night we went to a small motel on the edge of town using cash Clara had saved. She booked the room under a fake name and made sure no one saw us. The room was small and smelled like old soap, but it felt safe enough. We locked the door and pulled the curtains closed. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the drive again. That small piece of plastic and metal held everything, the truth, the danger, the reason for all of this. Clara set up the laptop again and said softly, "Let's pack it up." We made 3 copies on different USBs just in case. Then we hid one in the vent, one under the sink, and one inside Clara's boot. She said, "If they find us, they won't get all of them." I nodded, grateful for her calm mind, even when fear was everywhere. Hours passed. The sound of cars faded outside. We were both half asleep when I heard the knock. It was slow, soft, then again louder. I froze. Clara's eyes snapped open. We looked at each other, not breathing. I whispered, "Who is it?" No answer. The knock came again, 3 times, steady and deliberate. Clara motioned for me to stay back. She reached for a small wrench she kept in her bag and walked to the door. "Who's there?" She asked. No response. She looked through the peephole and whispered, "Lisa, it's the nurse from the hospital." My heart jumped. I went to the door and said gently, "What are you doing here?" She said in a trembling voice, "Please let me in. They know where you are." I hesitated, but then opened the door a crack. She stepped inside quickly and shut it behind her. Her face was pale, her hands shaking. She said, "I saw them at the hospital. They were asking for you. They had your picture. I think they're coming tonight." Clara locked the door and said, "How did you find us?" The nurse said, "I followed the officer. I saw him meet someone outside the hospital and they mentioned this town. I knew you'd need to know, Lisa. You're not safe." I sat down feeling dizzy. The world was spinning around me. I whispered, "Why are they doing this?" She said, "Because you're the only witness left. The others are gone or missing." Silence filled the room again. The nurse looked terrified. Clara looked ready to fight, and I felt something rise inside me, a quiet strength I hadn't felt before. Fear was still there, but it wasn't in control anymore. I stood up and said, "Then we'll take the truth to someone who can't be silenced. We'll go to the news, the kind that reaches everyone." The sky was still dark when we left the motel. Clara nodded and said, "Then take the main road before they find us." We drove along the back streets where the houses were far apart. The nurse looked at me and said quietly, "Be careful, they don't just erase evidence, they erase people." Clara kept her eyes on the mirror every few seconds, checking if anyone was behind us. The nurse sat in the back seat, whispering prayers under her breath. I sat in the front, holding the flash drive so tight my hand hurt. We didn't have a clear plan, yet only one name. Clara remembered from an old friend, a journalist named Tom, who used to cover medical scandals before he disappeared from the news. She said he lived somewhere near the old industrial town by the coast. If anyone could help us get the truth out, it was him. We drove for hours through the fog. The world outside looked quiet, but I could feel the tension in the air, every mile heavier than the one before. When we finally reached the town, the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of gold and gray. Clara parked behind a gas station and turned off the engine. She said softly, "We made it for now." Tom's address was on a small piece of paper, old and creased. We walked to a small house at the edge of the road. It looked worn out, the paint peeling, the windows covered with curtains. Clara knocked once, twice, no answer. Then a voice came from inside, rough and tired. "Who is it?" Clara said. "It's Clara Bell. You helped me once." Remember, there was a pause. Then the door opened just a little. A man with silver hair and sharp eyes looked out at us. Clara told him quickly we needed his help and that we had proof of something big. He hesitated, but when I showed him the flash drive, his face changed. He said quietly, "Come in." The house was small, full of books, papers, and an old typewriter on the desk. He listened while I told him everything about Mark, the note, the doctor, the hospital, Harris, and the company. When I finished, he didn't say anything for a while. He just stared at the floor. Then he said, "I heard rumors years ago about this kind of project, but I never found an thing solid. If this is real, Lisa, it could expose more than just one company. It could change everything." He took the drive and plugged it into his old computer. He clicked through the files, his hands shaking slightly when he saw Mark's final video. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes wide. He whispered, "I knew it. They were funding this through government contracts and using private labs to hide the evidence. Your husband tried to stop them. But when he found out too much, they silenced him." My heart ached hearing those words. The nurse was crying quietly. Clara sat beside me, holding my hand. Tom turned to me and said, "You're brave for coming this far, but once this gets out, they'll come for you all. We need to plan this carefully." We agreed to stay at his house until we could get the files duplicated and sent to trusted contacts in the media. Tom said he still knew one or two people who might listen. He spent hours writing notes, scanning files, burning copies onto hidden drives. I helped where I could. Though my hands still trembled, sometimes the nurse made tea for everyone and said softly, "I never thought I'd see people fighting for truth like this anymore. It gives me hope." For a few moments there was peace, but peace never lasted long in our story. That night, while Tom was working, the lights flickered twice. He frowned and said, "That's strange. The power never cut here." Clara looked at the window and froze. A dark SUV was parked across the street. Two men inside, barely moving. Tom whispered, Get down now. We crawled under the window, watching as one of the men stepped out holding something in his hand. He knocked on the neighbor's door first, pretending to ask for directions, but I could feel they weren't lost. They were waiting, Tom whispered. They're scanning for signals, probably tracing the files we need to move. We grabbed what we could. The drives, the laptop, a few papers. Clara found a back door that led to the alley. We slipped out quietly, the nurse clutching her bag like it was her heart. We die. That run yet. We moved slow, steady through the dark until we reached the trees at the edge of the town. When we finally stopped, I turned to Tom and said breathlessly, "What do we do now?" He said, "We head to the coast. There's an old radio station there. They can transmit this without needing the internet. No trace, no track. We can get the story out to the whole world." I said, "Will it be safe?" He smiled weakly and said, "Nothing is safe anymore, but it's worth trying." We started walking again. The road curved along the cliffs, the wind cold against our faces. Clara walked ahead, leading the way. I followed close behind, clutching the drive. Tom and the nurse just behind me. For a moment, as I looked at the horizon, I thought of Mark, of his smile, and how he always said that truth was the one thing that never died, no matter how deep people tried to bury it. When the radio tower finally came into view, it looked broken, old, but still standing like a survivor from another time. Tom smiled for the first time and said, "W.E. made it." Inside, the station dust filled the air, but the equipment still worked after some adjustment. Tom connected the drive to the console and began the upload. He said, "Once this goes live, it will broadcast to independent networks all over the country. No one can stop it now." But just as he pressed a button, the door behind us slammed open. A voice shouted, "Freeze!" And we turned to see Harris standing there, gun drawn, his face pale, his voice trembling. He said, "I told you not to make this worse, Lisa. You don't know what you're doing." Clara stepped in front of me, her hands raised. "Don't do this, Harris," she said. "You know this isn't right." He shook his head. "You don't understand. They'll destroy everything if this gets out. The world isn't ready for it." I looked at him and said quietly, "Maybe it's not the world that isn't ready. Maybe it's the people who've been lying all along." For a long second, no one moved. The machine kept blinking. The upload halfway done. Harris's hand shook as he pointed the gun. Then his eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw the same tired guilt that had been in Mark's eyes. I whispered, "You can still choose to do the right thing." He hesitated, his arm lowering slightly, but before he could speak, a shot rang out from outside the window, shattered. Tom shouted, "Get down!" Harris turned toward the noise, and I saw a flash of light from the trees outside. Everything became chaos. The nurse screamed. Clara pulled me to the floor. The upload continued, the small green light blinking faster and faster. Then suddenly the power went out. The room went black. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was light flickering across the broken window. It took me a moment to remember where I was. The smell of smoke hung in the air. The floor was cold beneath me, and my head throbbed when I tried to sit up. Clara's voice came softly from somewhere nearby. "Lisa, stay still. You're okay. You hit your head." I blinked and looked around. The room was a mess, papers everywhere. Wires torn from the wall. The console that had been uploading the files was half destroyed, but one small light was still glowing green. Tom was lying near the corner, holding his arm, blood soaking his sleeve, but he was alive. Harris was gone. Clara helped me sit up. She had a cut on her cheek and dirt on her hands, but her eyes were steady. I asked her what happened. She said, quietly, "Someone shot from outside. Harris tried to stop it. He pushed you down right before the glass shattered. Then he ran after whoever fired the shot. They're both gone now." I felt my chest tighten. There was so much loss, so much confusion. I looked at the console again and whispered, "Did it finish?" She nodded slowly. "I think so. The power died right after, but the light turned green. That means it sent a signal." Tom groaned and said, "If that went through, the story's out there now. Independent channels will start picking it up by morning. The truth is free, Lisa." I could barely breathe. I covered my face and cried, not from fear this time, but from something deeper. Relief, grief, everything at once. We stayed in that old radio station until the sun started rising. The world outside looked soft and golden, the kind of light that makes even broken things look beautiful. Clara helped Tom wrap his arm, and the nurse returned with water she had found in a storage cabinet. We were quiet for a while, letting the silence feel like peace. When we finally stepped outside, the morning air felt new, the wind carried the sound of distant waves, and somewhere far away birds were singing. I looked down at my hands and realized for the first time in weeks they weren't shaking anymore. We walked to the road and found an old pickup truck parked near the trees. The keys were still in the ignition, maybe left by whoever ran away. I climbed into the passenger seat. While Clara drove, the nurse sat in the back with Tom half asleep leaning against the window. As we drove, I turned on the small radio built into the dashboard, static at first. Then a faint voice broke through, a calm reporter voice reading headlines from an independent network. It said, breaking news: documents have surfaced exposing illegal genetic trials linked to multiple private corporations and government contracts. Evidence provided anonymously, confirmed by cross-reference with previous missing persons reports. My breath caught, and I looked at Clara. She smiled through tears. It worked, Lisa. It's out there. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Every time we tuned into another channel, we heard more people were asking questions, demanding answers. Reporters were calling it one of the biggest scandals in years, and though my name wasn't mentioned, I knew it didn't matter. The truth was enough. That evening we reached a small coastal town far from everything. Clara found a tiny house to rent from an old fisherman who didn't ask questions. We spent the next few days healing quietly. Tom's arm started to mend. The nurse finally slept without flinching at every sound, and I spent hours sitting by the water watching the wave hit the rocks, thinking about Mark. I still didn't know if he had planned all this before he died or if someone else had helped him, but I did know that everything he fought for wasn't in vain. He had given his life for truth and for a chance at justice, and now maybe others would be safe because of it. One night, as I sat by the shore, I heard footsteps behind me. Clara came and sat down beside me. She said softly, "You know, they'll probably never stop watching you." I smiled faintly and said, "Maybe not, but I'm not afraid anymore. I'm done running." She nodded, looking at the ocean. The moonlight touched her face, and for a moment we both just sat in silence, breathing the same salty air. The next morning, Tom left for the city. He said he would make sure the file stayed safe, that the story wouldn't disappear. Under pressure or politics, the nurse decided to stay with us for a while. She said she wanted to work somewhere honest, maybe a small clinic where she could help without fear. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, the fear faded into memory. Life became quiet again. I planted flowers outside the little house and started writing down everything that happened, not as a report, but as a story of truth, of courage, of people who chose kindness, even when the world was cruel. One evening while writing, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 6 words written in Mark's handwriting: "Proud of you, always my love." I held it to my heart, tears falling quietly. It felt like his goodbye, but also his blessing. Now, whenever I walk along the shore and feel the wind brush my face, I remember the day I ran from the hospital, the day everything changed: the note, the fear, the drive, the truth. Every step had led me here, to peace, to courage, to a life that no longer belonged to fear. I learned that bravery isn't loud. It isn't the sound of gunfire or sirens. It's the quiet decision to stand up for what's right. Even when you're alone, it's choosing hope over silence, kindness over bitterness, truth over safety. So if you ever find yourself at a moment where everything feels impossible, remember this: there will always be darkness, but there will also always be light. Sometimes that light is you, the end. Thanks for watching. More stories, for subscribe my channel.